I grew up in a house where the fridge had two shelves. My brother kept his stuff on the top shelf, labeled, his name written in black marker on every container, every juice box, every leftover from Sunday dinner. My mom did it for him, said he needed to know what was his. I had the bottom shelf. No label, no name, just whatever fit around his things. I didn't think much of it when I was 7. Kids don't analyze refrigerator politics, but somewhere around 13, I started to understand that the fridge was just the beginning. My brother's name is Preston. He's 3 years older than me, and from the moment he drew breath, my parents decided he was the one worth betting on. Not in a cruel, obvious way. They never said it out loud. They didn't have to. It was in the way my dad sat through every single one of Preston's baseball games but forgot to pick me up from debate practice twice. It was in the way my mom saved every drawing Preston made in kindergarten but threw away my science fair ribbon because she thought it was scrap paper. It was in the way, every time I brought home a grade, the response was good, but when Preston brought home the same grade, the response was a phone call to my grandparents. I was the background noise in my own house, and I got used to it, the way you get used to a hum from the walls, present, low, inescapable. Preston was charming in that effortless way some people are. The kind of person who walks into a room and people just rearrange themselves around him. He had my dad's jawline and my mom's laugh, and he knew exactly how to use both. Growing up, he wasn't cruel to me, not overtly. He mostly just ignored me. I was an inconvenience, a footnote. His little sister, who was always almost as good but never quite enough. When he went to college, my parents helped him with tuition, not all of it, but a substantial chunk. They refinanced a home equity line of credit and used part of it to cover his first 2 years at a private university in the Midwest. I know this because I found the paperwork by accident when I was looking for the car insurance documents at 17. When I got into college 2 years later, a solid state school, not as flashy, but a genuinely good program for business administration, my dad sat me down at the kitchen table and told me they couldn't help. "We stretched too far for your brother," he said. "We just don't have it." I nodded. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I think I had already been preparing for this without knowing it. I took out federal loans. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I worked 22 hours a week at a campus print shop my freshman year and moved up to 28 by junior year. I ate a lot of dining hall pasta and called home rarely because the calls always turned into updates about Preston, his new apartment, his new girlfriend, the promotion he was angling for at the firm where he'd landed after graduation. I graduated in 4 years with a 3.7 GPA, $41,000 in student loans, and nobody in the family who came to the ceremony except my aunt, who drove 3 hours because she'd heard my parents weren't planning to make the trip. They said it was too far. It was 4 hours from their house. They had driven farther to see Preston play an exhibition baseball tournament his sophomore year of college. My aunt, my mom's older sister, squeezed my hand after the ceremony and said, "You're going to be more than any of them ever imagined. I just need you to know that someone sees it." I have thought about that sentence almost every day since. After graduation, I took a job at a mid-sized marketing firm in Atlanta. Entry level, nothing glamorous, but I was good at it in a way that felt like finally being handed a tool that actually fit my hand. I had a knack for identifying what people needed before they knew how to ask for it. My managers noticed. Within 18 months, I had moved up twice. Within 3 years, I was managing accounts worth more than I had made in my entire life up to that point combined. I didn't tell my parents much. Not because I was hiding it, but because they didn't ask. Preston, meanwhile, had started his own company. A small consulting firm, B2B focused, targeting mid-sized regional businesses. My dad had invested in it. A significant amount. I found out later it was $60,000, which was supposedly drawn from a trust fund that my maternal grandmother had set up for both of us before she passed. A trust that was supposed to be split equally when we each turned 25. I had turned 25 and heard nothing. I assumed the trust had been dissolved or was empty. I didn't know to push because nobody told me it existed in any meaningful way until a conversation with my aunt 2 years later where she mentioned it offhandedly, assuming I already knew. I sat very still during that phone call. I asked her to repeat what she said. She repeated it. I said, I never received anything. There was a long pause. Then my aunt said very quietly, "Oh, sweetheart, I hired a probate attorney." Not immediately. I spent 3 weeks convincing myself there was a reasonable explanation, then I spent 2 more weeks angry. Then I made the call. The attorney confirmed that the trust had been active, that it had contained approximately $80,000 split evenly between me and my brother, and that my portion had been accessed by my father as a co-trustee and redirected, apparently, into Preston's business venture. Without my knowledge or signature. This was not legal. This was, in fact, fraud. I didn't go to the police immediately. My attorney advised me to gather documentation first, which took several months and felt like assembling a mosaic out of broken glass, slow, careful, and occasionally cutting. During that time, I kept showing up to my job, kept hitting my targets, kept building my career, and told nobody in my family what I knew. There is a specific kind of power in knowing something that the other people in the room do not know. You know, it is not comfortable power. It sits in your chest like a stone, but it is still power. Around this time, something unexpected happened at work. Our firm had been brought in as a strategic partner for a new client, a regional private equity group that was quietly expanding into media acquisitions across the Southeast. The lead contact on their side was a man named Arthur Delaney, mid-50s, low-key, in the way that genuinely powerful people often are. He wore the same brand of slightly worn dress shoes to every meeting. He never raised his voice. He listened in a way that made you feel like the most important person in the room, and I had learned enough by that point to recognize that this was not a performance. It was just who he was. I led the pitch for our firm. It went well. Better than well. Arthur Delaney pulled me aside afterward and asked if I'd be interested in a more direct role, consulting with his team on communications and brand positioning for several of the companies in their portfolio. I said yes. Over the following year, we worked closely together. I delivered. He noticed. He started including me in conversations that were bigger than my official role, asking my opinion on deals I wasn't technically part of, introducing me to people in rooms I hadn't expected to be in. I knew, in a quiet and careful way, that something significant was shifting in my career. I did not tell my family about Arthur Delaney. I did not tell them about the private equity work. My calls home were still short and still mostly about Preston, his company, his new office space, the pitch he was putting together for a major expansion, the investor he'd been courting for months who might change everything. I made the appropriate sounds. I got off the phone. I went back to work. Then my mother called in October and said she wanted us all together for Thanksgiving. She said Preston had a big announcement and she wanted the family there. She said it in the way she always said things about Preston, with that particular warmth that she never quite managed when she talked about me. I almost said no. I was working on 3 active projects, and the idea of sitting at that table and performing normalcy felt like something I didn't have the energy for. But my attorney had advised me that the legal process would be moving into a more formal phase in the new year, and that I should be prepared for significant family conflict at that point. She gently suggested that if I wanted one final, uncomplicated holiday before everything changed, I should consider taking it. I booked a flight. I arrived on Wednesday evening. My parents' house in Cincinnati looked the same as always. The same wreath on the door. The same smell of my mom's candles in the hallway. The same inexplicable collection of decorative geese on the entryway shelf. My mom hugged me. My dad nodded from the couch where he was watching a game. Preston wasn't there yet. He was coming Thursday morning with his girlfriend. I slept in my old room. The bottom shelf in the fridge was unlabeled, still. Preston arrived Thanksgiving morning with a woman named his girlfriend, Tessa, who was polished in a way that suggested significant effort and had the particular energy of someone auditioning. She was pleasant to me, in the careful, slightly distant way people are pleasant to the sibling they've been warned about. I wondered what version of me Preston had given her. At the table, before dinner, Preston stood up and made his announcement. He had secured a major investor for his consulting firm's expansion. 6 figures. He was opening a second office, hiring 12 people, scaling the operation significantly. He looked at my father when he said it, the way he always looked at my father, like he was handing him a gift. My dad's eyes filled. Actual tears. He reached over and grabbed Preston's shoulder. I watched this and felt nothing except a kind of hollow steadiness, not bitterness, not envy, just the final, clean clarity of understanding exactly what I had always been in his family and deciding, firmly, that I was done performing otherwise. Congratulations, I said. I meant it, technically. The investment was real, the growth was real, the effort was real. I just also knew things about the funding history of that company that my brother didn't know I knew. After dinner, while my mom and Tessa were in the kitchen and my dad had gone to call his brother, Preston sat across from me in the living room with a glass of wine, and that particular ease he always carried. "So what's going on with you?" he asked. The way you ask someone when you don't actually want a long answer. "Work is good," I said. "Really good, actually." He nodded, already looking toward the television. "Still at that marketing firm?" "Consulting now, mostly. Private equity adjacent." He looked back at me then. A flicker of something. Recalibration, maybe. "Huh, what firm?" I told him. He set down his wine glass. "You work with Arthur Delaney's group?" he said. "I've been consulting with them for about a year." There was a pause. Preston's jaw shifted in a way I had never seen before. That particular expression people make when a map they were holding turns out to be wrong. "Arthur Delaney," he said again, slowly, "is the investor I just announced." I let that sentence exist in the room for a moment. "I know," I said. This was not entirely true. I had not known at the moment of his announcement. I had suspected, based on some conversations with Arthur's team over the prior weeks, but I had not confirmed it. The confirmation had just happened, here in my parents' living room, in real time. I kept my face very still. "So you know him," Preston said. There was an edge in his voice that he was trying to control. "We've worked closely together." He picked up his wine glass again. Took a long sip. "Why didn't you say anything?" "You didn't ask." That landed. I watched it land. The holiday ended without incident. I flew home Friday morning. Preston texted me that evening. A long message, casual in tone but clearly written carefully, asking if I was planning to stay connected with Arthur's team and whether I might put in a good word here or there. I read it twice. I did not respond. The following Monday, I had my regular check-in call with Arthur's communications director, and in passing, I mentioned that the consulting firm they'd just invested in was run by my brother. There was a brief pause. Then she said, "Oh, actually, Arthur's going to want to hear that. Can I loop him in?" I said yes. Arthur called me that afternoon. He was characteristically calm. He asked me directly whether I had any concerns given the family relationship about the investment. I told him I didn't have concerns about the investment specifically. I told him there were some family financial matters that had come to my attention in the past year that I was handling through legal channels, and that I wanted to be transparent that they were related. He asked a few careful questions. I answered them honestly. I did not embellish. I did not try to steer. I just told him the truth about the trust, the redirected funds, the legal process underway. Arthur was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "I appreciate you telling me this directly. We'll need to take a closer look at some things on our end." I don't know exactly what happened in the weeks after that call on Arthur's side. I know that Preston called me in mid-December, furious in a way I had never heard from him. Tight and controlled and cold, which was somehow worse than shouting. He said Arthur's team had begun asking detailed questions about the company's financial history and capitalization. He said the investment terms were being reconsidered. He said he didn't know what I had said or done, but that if I was involved in this, there would be consequences. I listened to the entire call without interrupting. When he was done, I said, "Preston, I didn't do anything except tell the truth about what was done to me. If that created problems, I think you need to ask yourself why the truth is a problem." He hung up. My parents called the next day, both of them, on speaker, which they had never done before in my life. My mom cried. My dad was angry in that particular quiet way that meant he was scared. They said I was destroying the family. They said Preston had worked so hard. They said I needed to think about what I was doing. I thought about the bottom shelf of the refrigerator. I thought about the empty seat at my graduation. I thought about $60,000 redirected from my grandmother's trust without my knowledge or consent. I said, I love you both, but what was done to me was wrong, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make this easier. My mom said you always had to make everything so hard. I sat with that for a long time after the call ended. The legal process moved forward in January. My attorney filed the formal complaint. The documentation was solid. Bank records, trust documents, transfer authorizations. My father retained a lawyer. Preston retained a lawyer. The conversations between all parties that had once been family phone calls were now routed through attorneys, which felt surreal and also, in a strange way, like a relief. Clean. Honest. No more performance. In March, my father agreed to a settlement, repayment of the misappropriated funds plus interest, structured over 3 years. No criminal charges were pursued. My attorney advised that civil recovery was the cleaner path given the family dynamics and the complexity of the trust documentation. I accepted this because it was what I could actually get, and because there is a difference between justice and the legal version of justice, and I had long since made peace with that gap. Preston's expansion did not go through as planned. Arthur's team pulled back significantly on the investment terms after their internal review. I don't know all the details. I know the second office didn't open. I know the 12 hires didn't happen. I know Preston sold his car in April, though I only know this because my aunt mentioned it, not because anyone in my immediate family spoke to me directly. My parents and I did not speak for 4 months. When my mother finally called in the spring, it was to tell me that she had started seeing a therapist and that she thought I might be right, that some things had not been handled fairly. She didn't apologize exactly, but she said it, and I believe she meant it, and I decided that was enough to work with for now. My father has not called me. I have called him twice. He answered once and we talked for 11 minutes about nothing in particular, and when I said goodbye, he said, "Take care of yourself." It wasn't warm. But it wasn't a door closing either. Preston and I have not spoken since the December phone call. I don't know if we will again. I have spent some time grieving this, not the brother I had, but the brother I kept hoping he might eventually become. That grief is real and I don't want to minimize it. It sits next to everything else I feel, which is mostly a kind of clear, open steadiness that I didn't have before. My aunt came to visit me in Atlanta in May. We went to a farmer's market on Saturday morning and ate empanadas on a bench in the sun, and she asked me how I was really doing, and I told her honestly that I was okay, that I was more than okay, that I had built something I was proud of, and that for the first time in my adult life I felt like I was standing in a room where no one was going to move me to the edges. She squeezed my hand, same as she had after graduation. Same 2 hands, different morning, different bench. She said, "I always knew." I said, "I'm starting to know it too." I still work with Arthur's team. The relationship has grown. I'm now a named consultant on 2 of their active portfolio projects, and there are conversations about a more formal arrangement that I'm taking seriously. I am not going to tell you that everything worked out perfectly, because it didn't. The money I've recovered doesn't make up for the years I worked around a disadvantage that was deliberately constructed. The legal outcome is not the same as the family I deserved. But I am 31 years old. I have savings, real ones for the first time in my life. I have an apartment with a kitchen where I label exactly nothing, because nothing needs to be labeled. It all belongs to me. I have a career that I built from the bottom shelf up, without help, without a name on the container, without anyone in my family pointing at me and saying, "This one, we're betting on this one." They didn't bet on me. I bet on myself. And I am still in the game. I've thought a lot about what actually happened. Not the legal part, not the investor part, but the part underneath all of it. The part that started long before any of it came to a head at that Thanksgiving table. What I keep coming back to is this. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to be the person who steals from their own child, or the sibling who points at someone they grew up with and calls them a failure in front of a room full of people. Those things don't happen in a single moment. They happen in 1,000 small decisions made over years, each one seeming harmless on its own, each one quietly building the kind of character that eventually does exactly what Preston did, what my father did, what my mother allowed to happen by looking the other way. And the same is true in the other direction. I didn't end up where I am because of one good decision. I ended up here because of 1,000 small ones too. Every shift at the print shop, every scholarship application I almost didn't send, every time I chose to keep going when the easier thing would have been to just accept the version of myself my family had decided I was. Those choices didn't feel significant at the time. They felt exhausting. They felt lonely. But they were building something, whether I could see it or not. That's the thing nobody tells you about integrity when you're young. It doesn't pay off immediately. It doesn't even feel like much while you're doing it. You just do the honest thing, the harder thing, the thing that costs you something. And you keep doing it, and eventually you look up and realize that the person you've become is someone you can actually respect. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because you didn't stop when it would have been reasonable to stop. Preston had every advantage I didn't. The money, the backing, the family belief. And he still ended up losing the investment, losing the expansion, selling his car. Not because I did anything to him. I just told the truth about what was done to me. The collapse happened because a foundation built on dishonesty, on other people's resources taken without consent, cannot hold when someone finally decides to stop pretending it isn't happening. That's not revenge. That's just reality catching up. I think about my aunt a lot. She drove 3 hours to a graduation that my own parents didn't attend. She called me sweetheart when I told her what I discovered about the trust. She showed up, consistently, without being asked. Intelligence without integrity is just cleverness. Useful maybe, but not the kind of thing that makes someone drive 3 hours because they believe in you. What she gave me was something different. It was the model of a person who does the right thing because it's right, not because it's convenient or rewarded. I'm still learning how to be that person. I'm still working out what I owe to people who hurt me versus what I owe to myself. I don't have a clean answer. What I have is the willingness to keep asking the question honestly, to keep choosing the harder thing when it matters, and to build a life where the foundation is actually mine. The bottom shelf was unlabeled. Everything on it belonged to me anyway. It just took me a while to understand that.